I'm Chris Stafford, and this is AART, the podcast where we get to know the women behind their art.
If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll show you what I mean. If you don't feel it, I'll make you feel it. I'll bring you to your knees. If you follow me.
My guest this week is Canadian still life and figurative artist Ingrid Christensen. Ingrid was born in 1964 in Golden, British Columbia, a small town in the mountains of Western Canada. She is the third of 4 children with an older sister and between 2 brothers. Ingrid's parents, John and Ella Anderson, were German immigrants who arrived in Canada after World War II and eventually made their way to running a motel. As a child, Ingrid was not exposed to the art world, but she was keen on drawing and is self-taught as an artist. After high school, further education took her away from growing up in a small town to Vancouver, where she earned a BA at the University of British Columbia. This was followed by a B.Ed from Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Upon graduating, Ingrid spent a few years in teaching, but eventually realized that this was not her calling. Once she married, she set off on bigger adventures to Australia and New Zealand, and later to Japan and Thailand, where she learned the art of silversmithing. Upon returning to Calgary, the couple started a family. It was then that Ingrid began her journey in painting. First in watercolours, then later in oils, which is her preferred medium. Her art has won both national and international awards and has been highlighted in International Artist, Avenues and Arabella magazines. Ingrid has written articles about art and creativity for Artsy Online magazine. She says she is first and foremost a painter of light. Her work is an ongoing exploring of light's ability to elevate even the most mundane objects into a glowing subject of a painting. When she is not painting, Ingrid is teaching either online or with in-person workshops. Ingrid has 2 sons, Zach and Ben, and is married to film producer David Christensen. She lives in Calgary, Alberta. Ingrid, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
Well, I'm very glad to have discovered you. You were recommended by an earlier guest on the podcast, Jess Fershine from Washington, D.C., who clearly admires your work. And she, like you, are still life painters. And the one thing that you rely on is good light. And looking at your studio just now, you have a lot of wonderful light there.
I do. And it's an honor that somebody recommended me because, it's interesting for me to realize how far my work can travel thanks to the internet and social media. So it's very cool. Yes, I do have great light in my studio, but it's never enough. I've got big LED panels above my head and skylights and windows. And still in the middle of winter here where it's getting, I'm losing the light by 3:30. I'm thinking, I need an electrician to put in another, 4 or 5 big panels above me. So.
Well, yes, you are further north, of course, being in Calgary. And yeah. I'm wondering, what sort of day, I was going to ask you what sort of daylight you have there to paint, because obviously you'd be bound to your studio probably more than you'd like to be. So what sort of painting hours do you get in a day, Ingrid?
Well, usually I paint for about 6 a day. 6 is about average. And I am a studio painter. I mean, I do paint plein air, and I think that's invaluable for just seeing how real natural light works on color, to go outside and actually see, under different lighting conditions, what happens to the color of green grass or that person's red shirt or whatever under the cloudy sky as opposed to under the bright sunlight. You can't figure that out in the studio with spotlights. No matter how good the spotlights, I've got a really great photo from a Photoshop, I've got this floodlight for illuminating my still life. And I asked them at the time that I bought it, I said, I'd like something that mimics the sun. I want really bright, I want hard, crisp-edged shadows, because that's my ideal. I just love sunlight on color. And so they sold me something, and it was all I could afford. The one that I really wanted was about $4,000. And so I said, well, thanks anyway. But the one I could afford is good, and the colors are pretty true. But what no artificial light can capture is the colors that you would see in shadows, and the bouncing color, of course, from all sorts of other things in nature. So if you're standing in a green forest, to put an object in a green forest and see how much color and light bounces into its shadows, and what color and temperature is the light side. All of that stuff you can't replicate in the studio. So going outside, even if it's just in my yard and setting my still life up out there, has been invaluable for teaching me about the nature of light and color. And I've still got so much to learn. I am constantly learning about it, but yeah, it's a start. But mostly I'm a studio painter. I'm most comfortable with my billion brushes and every color I need.
And I would imagine when you do step outside, you have the most wonderful views, because you've got Banff to the west, and beyond that, Golden, where you grew up, which we'll talk about in a moment. But I'm wondering about the climate that you have there. How would you be able to spend outside? And would you dare to go out in winter? Would it just be too cold? You'd probably freeze to death, wouldn't you?
Well, you'd freeze. I find that I have painted outdoors on a particularly mild winter's day, at which, sometimes we get a wind. It's called a Chinook. It comes from west out of the Rockies. And Calgary gets this sudden warming when there's a Chinook. And so we might go from -20 to +10 within a day. And everybody who's prone to migraines promptly gets a migraine, and it's a really crazy thing. But on days like that, I have been out painting, but I find that my fingers don't work beyond lower than 5 degrees Celsius. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit, but 5 is sort of my tolerance. Then my fingers just go numb and I can't do anything with them. But you can go out plein air painting from a car. So some people have car like steering wheel little easels where they put a tiny panel on a little rig that attaches to their steering wheel, have their paints and whatnot beside them on the passenger seat, and have managed to keep a year-round outdoor practice that way.
Well, that's quite a good idea. You've given me something to think about there.
And there's always a good second-hand van if you can rig a little heater inside of it.
Yeah, there's lots of potential. And of course, you mentioned, to me that how you are self-taught, completely self-taught. You're constantly learning, and it's evolving. And I think that's the fun about artwork, isn't it? That we are perpetual students.
Yes.
In the craft. I'm wondering really, when you began your art career, so to speak, what was it that inspired you and motivated you to think, okay, I'm going to teach myself and I'm going to be able to do this?
Well, I think like probably every other artist in any genre, or in any type of art field, whether it's dancers or singers or writers or visual artists, we have always done this thing. And at some point, we just kind of give it a stab and go, I wonder if I could sell this thing that I do, which I just love doing. I wonder if there's a place where I could make some money at it. And so I was the kid who was always drawing and, doodling little horses mostly into the margins of my quizzes. After I'd finished them, I'd sit there and wait for the class to be over and doodle all over them. And my favorite class was always art class in school. And then I went to university and took a year of fine art thinking, okay, I'll do a fine art degree, but it was really at a time, maybe it still is this way in universities, I don't know, where it was all about concept and nothing about the technical. So I still remember what made me quit the fine arts program and switch to more of an English major, still keeping a little bit of fine art. But it was when they gave us this list of acrylic paints that we were to buy, this palette. And we walked into the first year class, having finished our little segment on clay, and now it was going to be painting. And there was this nude model in front of us, and the woman the instructor just said, now paint her. I thought, I have no idea. So I did what I'd always done, which is just you draw her and then you fill her in. And there was just no instruction, and it was all about, what are you trying to say? And it's like, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I'd sure love to be able to paint this woman so she doesn't look terrible and have, ghastly looking skin color and all of this. So I quit the fine art. I ended up becoming an English major and getting a Bachelor of Ed. And then I taught for a few years, and I found that was just not good for me. Teaching, I was teaching mostly junior high at one point. Privileged junior high kids whose parents were largely absent, but would come in, all guns blazing if their kid had been sent to the principal for something really quite awful, but they'd come in and tell you why little Junior should be allowed in your class, even though he's swearing at you. And I thought, well, okay, this is not healthy. I'm dreading work. And then, so I started doing jewelry making. And I was a silversmith for a number of years. I learned how to make vessels in Thailand. My husband and I were traveling in Thailand, and we settled for a few months in Chiang Mai, where he learned Thai every day, and I went to learn silversmithing, just, sitting cross-legged on the ground, hammering away and heating the silver over coal. Or charcoal fires. And it was just an amazing thing. So I came back and was silversmithing for a number of years. And then I had a couple of kids, and everything sort of ground to a halt. And I came back and started doing some pottery and got really into that. And then my kids just became sort of needy, and one of them in particular. And so I ended up being full-time, stay home until they were in elementary school. And I remember, like, you can't set up a pottery kiln and just kind of go in and do that for a few minutes here and there. You have to really devote hours to it. And I didn't have hours at a stretch. And so really I was doing nothing art related for a few years. But I remember sitting poolside interminably every summer for their swimming lessons. And I went to the library and would pick out art books. And what really drew me at the time, for whatever reason, I don't know, were the painting books. And I did a lot of reading about the artists that drew me, which were invariably the French Impressionists. And then I found the Russian Impressionists and was just like, oh man, these are the ones, because they have the vigor and the color that just really struck a chord with me. Mostly their color was more something that I could relate to, because I think the Russian landscape and the atmosphere is much more relatable to the Canadian landscape than French, airy, atmospheric French landscapes are. I look at the French Impressionists, I know they were painting what they saw, and they were seeing violets in the shadows. They were seeing lots of atmospheric recession, a sense of things getting much cooler and lighter as it went back in space. But Canada, probably like Russia, has at least the part of it I'm in, has a very cold, hard light. And we don't get this beautiful, soft moisture-laden air that creates this lovely recession as it goes back in space. We see a lot for a very long distance, and it's hard and it's contrasty. So we don't see those lovely, delicate lavenders in shadows and whatnot. So I found the Russian Impressionists. Eventually, my kids were both in school, and I started watercolor painting because it was something that I could do in the house. I didn't have a studio at the time. I could do it in the house. I could set it up and take it down really quickly while they were in school, before they got back. And so I did that for a number of years. And then when I wanted to work, and I just got engrossed. I don't know. It wasn't a conscious thing. Like, now I'm going to try and make a living at it. It's just, wow, I just love getting up and getting the kids to school and being able to paint every day. And so I just kept going. and eventually, you join a local arts group and you put some stuff in a few shows and you get a nice response if you're lucky. And it just kind of keeps rolling forward.
You got hooked, basically, didn't you? And there was no...
I did, yeah. I started with books, and then I thought, well, I'll try that. That doesn't look so very hard. And you know what Degas said, painting is easy until you know how to do it. And so for those first glorious years, I thought, well, this is a piece of cake. And then you start to become more discerning and realize, oh, I'm not doing it very well. That's why it's a piece of cake. And after that, it's all work, but it's joyful work.
I'm going to pick up on what you said earlier about drawing horses when you were a child. And having been a horsewoman myself, I'm curious as to where you got that from, because I could never draw a horse. I could never draw my pony as a child. Where did that interest in horses come from?
Doesn't every young girl want to have a pony? I mean, I just, my friends, my best friends in school, throughout school, were kids who were bussed in. I lived in a very small town, 3,500 people, and the surrounding rural kids would, catch the bus on their little back roads and come in every day. And my best friends were people who lived rurally, one on a farm and one just on a property and she had a horse. And so when I was lucky enough to be able to catch a lift from somebody out to their property for a few hours, we would ride their horses, and it was heaven. I begged for horses, but my brother was terribly allergic, and to be honest, so was I. So my parents always said no. And but I just loved everything about horses, so I would find photos and take photos while I was out riding, and then come home and painstakingly try to draw them. So I became actually pretty proficient, and I don't think it ever leaves you. I did a really small series of horses about a year ago, and it all came back. And it was just as much fun as when I was a kid to be able to paint that anatomy. Loved it.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
You mentioned they're growing up in Golden, British Columbia, a mountain range there. And in the 60s, what I would imagine would be pretty quiet. Your parents, who ran a motel, so I'm sure you had a lot of time to yourself. What was childhood like for you, amusing yourselves?
Yeah, it was amusing ourselves because it was the 60s. We had, Golden had 2 radio stations. One of them was country western. The other one was really hard rock. And we had, I can't remember, maybe it was 3 television stations, but there was nothing to do for the majority of every day.
Gosh, an abundance of riches there. 3 TV stations.
3 TV stations. I remember when we got color, I think I was in grade 3 or 4. It's like, oh my God, we got a color TV. Everybody was just aghast. But there was really, there was a real routine to it. You'd come home from school, you'd watch Edge of Night, which was a soap opera that my mom loved. It was a break in their day. They'd be working all morning and the afternoon to do the laundry for all of those motel rooms, to restock, towels, and they had cleaning help as well, and make sure that the rooms were perfect. And then they would just take this pause at about 3:30 when we came home from school, and we'd all just sit and watch Edge of Night with my mom, have some sort of wonderful thing that she had managed to bake, even though she was busy doing laundry for 26 rooms. And then, get on with it. And my kids didn't have much homework then. Like, truly, I had no homework, and I did well in school. And I was not abnormal in that. Not like, with my kids now, we're growing up. They had just homework every night, and so much awful amounts of it. Anyway, I would just draw. Sometimes I'd go out and ride around the town. It was a small town, and I could be really free ranging. And so I was, on my bike, and other than that, I was drawing. And I was thinking about this because I was listening to one of your podcasts where you interviewed Sarah Sedgwick, and she was talking about her experience in a city and her early childhood experience with art. And she had access to museums, and, that sort of informed her eye, and art camps. And I was thinking last night, it's like, well, what informed me, And I realized that what it was comic books and, sometimes box sets of books, which my dad somehow picked up. There was no bookstore in Golden at the time. And so I think it might have been even door to door. They still had, gosh, I sound old. They still had door to door salesmen doing the rounds with like encyclopedias and box sets of books. And my dad would buy kids' picture books and storybooks. And I particularly remember these Disney books. They were 4 big hardcovers filled with Disney stories. They were fairy tales that had been Disneyfied for the most part. And I remember just sitting with comic books and with these sorts of books and drawing from them, trying to teach myself, how to make something look like something.
And were you the only one in the family then that was so inclined towards art?
Yeah, I pretty much was. I'm trying to think, what did the rest of my siblings get up to? And it's funny how little you pay attention to your siblings. It's like, oh, my sister's out. But she was 6 years older. And so, our lives really didn't cross paths very often. She had loads of friends and she was out. They could all drive. And meanwhile, my younger brother was 3 years younger, and he was just a total brat. So, let him have his friends, whatever. And my older brother, he was more interested in music, not making it, just listening to music and building things. And he was a great model maker. But I was the only one who would sit with a pencil as my entertainment.
And what about musical influences as a child? Did that come into play?
Not really, because as I said, we had 2 radio stations and I remember, and we didn't have a music shop in Golden.
No record player.
We had a record player, this monster thing, and we had, a handful of albums that my parents liked. So my parents were originally from Germany, came over after the war with nothing, absolutely nothing, and eventually built a business. And so they, the records that they had somehow acquired, probably on trips to Calgary, which was the nearest big city, about 3 hours drive, were like German albums, German Lieder, kind of folky, just not something I could get behind. So I wasn't that interested in what was there. We had a few more contemporary albums, but really we had no way to acquire them. And on the trips when we went to Calgary, it was always a big shopping spree for the motel, like we're we're low on sheets, so you'd go to the sheet supplier, and we need more towels, and you'd go to the towel supplier. We might be able to squeeze in a lunch somewhere, like McDonald's was the biggest treat, because of course we had nothing like that in Golden. And you'd squeeze in a lunch, and maybe if there was time, you could spend an hour at the Calgary Zoo, which was a great big treat for us as kids. And then you'd head back home same day, because you can't leave a motel. You know, my dad would leave one of the cleaning staff in charge, and that's not a great idea. So yeah, we'd get home, and that would be the extent of it. So pretty much we were stuck in Golden. We wouldn't leave. And there was, you know, the Sears catalog, you could order things, and they'd arrive eventually at the local hardware store. You could go look at the catalog and order something, which we didn't do that often. That was an extravagance. So I can't even remember where this was going, but we were cloistered. We did very little. We didn't have access to art or books or music other than what was on the radio or on the occasional dance. You know, you'd go and there would be a local person who had set himself up as a DJ, and you'd hear something new. But there really wasn't arts and culture in Golden when I was growing up.
Given your parents' European background, what influence did that have on you?
I think not their European background, their immigrant background. You know, my mother's family lost absolutely everything in the war. She was uprooted and relocated by the Russians a couple of times. Her father ended up in a prisoner of war camp for a big part of it. Her mother was really unwell, and being the eldest, my mom, and the eldest being like 14, 13, my mom had to care for her siblings and her mother. They had to move from one country to another with a cart. That at time they had to sell the horse, or maybe it was commandeered, I'm not sure. And so my mom was pulling it at times. And so my dad's experience was less traumatic, but still, you know, wartime Germany, growing up in that is no cakewalk either. And so they came over, they didn't know the language. My dad came over first. He had $10 to his name, and he didn't speak English. And he came over with a friend because they had heard that you could make money there working on railways. And so he worked as a laborer, and then as a milkman. Eventually, he got to know my mom through a friend who was a nurse in Germany, and my mom had eventually managed to, after the war, become a nurse, trained to become a nurse, and she looked after a relative of my dad's, and the relative, I think it was an aunt, sent Dad a note and sent him a letter and said, you know, I've met this wonderful girl, she'd be perfect for you. And so Dad sent for Mom. He sent her a picture. She sent him a picture. She came over on the boat, crossed Canada from Halifax to middle of nowhere Golden, and then they got to know each other, and everything about their lives was hard, and poverty was just, you know, constant. And so not the European background, but the immigrant background, having to start absolutely from zero and build a life, I think it affected all of us. My siblings and I are all hard workers. We're not profligate. We're very practical. And yeah, we rely on ourselves, I think, a lot. We're independent.
How did they get started then? Given that they had nothing to build a business in the motel industry as well.
Yeah, I know. They worked and saved. And my dad, you know, working on the railway, building railway and then highways as well. He was just saving all of his money, and some of it he was sending back to his parents in Germany, and some of it he was saving. And of course, when he married Mum, they were definitely saving for a family, which there were 4 of us. And she started, when she had enough English, she started working as a nurse in the local hospital, which was great that she could get work there. And eventually, I mean, they bought a house, which I think was really hard to save for, but eventually they decided they wanted to stop working for other people and build a business themselves. And I always remember my mom telling a story about how they drove to Radium. Radium is a spa town. It's tiny, and it has a hot springs, which is the draw for the town. And so they've got these hot pools. And they drove to Radium thinking that would be a great place to have a small business because it's such a touristed town in the summer. And they had an appointment to go and look at a snack stand or something on the main highway, that like a Dairy Queenish kind of thing that was being sold. And so they had an appointment after lunch, and over lunch they split a beer with their sandwich. And Mom just felt she was much too tipsy to go and talk to these people after having split a beer. And so they didn't go. And that, I guess, plan B was, let's start something in Golden, where we're living right now. And they built one building at a time. When they sold the motel, it had 4 buildings, but for years it just had one building with 5 or 6 rooms. My dad would live on site. My sister remembers, I don't remember, she's older, but she remembers delivering his meals for him from our house where Mom was with us kids. She would walk 3 or 4 blocks to deliver his meals to him, and he'd sleep on site. And a lot of the labor that was done, he certainly participated in, building new buildings as they could be afforded. And it took many, many years to build the buildings and build up the business, but they were patient and just deeply hardworking people.
Yeah, what an amazing discipline that they had, which they clearly instilled in all of you, as you said.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what your relationship then was with your mother and father. How would you characterize it?
It was good. I mean, they were just really, really busy all the time. A motel is something where you don't get days off. It's 7 days a week. And they would take, as we were growing up, not in the early years when it was just unaffordable, they would take 2 weeks over Christmas, which is when it was really slow in the business. Golden now has a ski hill, so it's not slow over Christmas, but at the time there was no ski hill to draw people. And so they would close it for 2 weeks, have somebody come and make sure the pipes didn't freeze and that sort of thing, and take us somewhere wonderful like California or Florida or Hawaii. And I can't imagine how hard it was for them to save to take a family of 6 to places like that for 2 weeks. It must have been just extraordinary. And so that was when I really would get to know them. I'd see my mom finally relax. She wasn't always running 100 miles an hour to, take care of a family of 6 and take care of this business and get all the laundry done and, for the business and all of that stuff. So I would get to really see what they were like in a relaxed state for 2 weeks out of the year. But for the rest, they were pretty focused and busy morning till night. I remember sitting at the dinner table and somebody, the intercom from the office to the house would buzz, and Dad would have to leap up and go to the office and check somebody in, or maybe somebody needed more towels or whatever. But he was just constantly on the move during every meal. And they were as loving as they could possibly be given very short time with us. And they were strict because, you've got 4 kids and there's bound to be fighting. And so you come in and you just kind of shoo them to their rooms and, smack somebody on the bum with a slipper on the way and hope that they settle down enough so that you can get back to the thing that you've got to get done, before somebody comes to be checked into the room again. It was benign neglect for the most part.
Did they read to you at bedtime?
I presume they might have. I mean, there were children's books. Some of them were in German, and I know Dad went through a big phase where he was trying to teach us to speak German. He just felt that was important. We had gone back to Germany to see my mother's family. My dad's family, he had sponsored to come over to Canada, so they were with us. But we'd gone to see my mother's family, who ended up being settled in East Germany, which was just awful. And somebody heard us speaking and saw how little we understood or how little we could speak German. We could all understand German just fine, but we couldn't really speak it because we never did at home, the kids. And sort of berated Dad on the street for what are you doing? You're not teaching your kids German. So he came home and he tried to teach us German. And it was terrible. He'd pull us all aside one by one and he'd read these German books to us and, sort of Jack and Jill kind of books and make us write. And that was all I remember of him interacting with us with books. We all eventually wore him down and he quit.
So clearly there were no time or places to visit art museums and so on in your youth. Just going back to Golden, and you mentioned how small the town was. Was there a hospital where you were actually born then, Ingrid?
Yeah, there was a hospital in Golden. Yep. And it drew in people from many different, outlying small communities. And sometimes a helicopter would come in to the Golden Hospital with somebody who had been injured on the highway or a skiing accident, like a backcountry or whatever. We would get those people as well. So there was a hospital there. Yeah.
So leaving home meant what to you? At what age? And what did travel actually mean to you then, growing up in such a small provincial town?
Yeah, it was wild. I was sent to Vancouver because my sister and my brother had been sent to Vancouver to go to UBC, and my parents. Another thing, in a little town like that, you don't really have career counselors. There's no such thing. So there was nobody who said, hey, what are you good at? What do you think you'd like to do? Here's how to apply to a university. My parents had to figure that out on their own. So they and friends who had kids of the same age sort of muddled through and helped us, forced us to cobble together university applications because we were expected to go to university. And there was really no two ways about it. And we could have been, of course, you can always say no. I flatly refuse and I ran away from home, but we weren't those sorts of kids. And we all went to university and took a thing, just kind of drew a name out of a hat. Well, fine art, or, my sister took French, whatever, almost nothing was put into use career-wise later on, but we were required to go. But university, just the whole being in a big city after living in a town of 3,500 people where we seldom ever left it was just pretty dramatic. So I was grateful for living in residence, and that's like a small town again, and you all eat together in the cafeteria in the first year. And so I could ease my way into it and just make little forays off campus and go, wow, look, there's all this stuff I can go and do in this amazing place. But I can't say that what I did was go straight to an art gallery or a museum. I had no interest in that. I went out and explored restaurants and, bars and dance clubs and that. It was a long time before I got cultured.
And then there were boyfriends, I'm sure.
Oh, well, yeah, I know. And the boyfriends who were not destined to spend their lives in Golden working in the lumber industry, which was the industry that the town was built around. So, it was lovely, but it was a culture shock. I remember driving down with friends to see the Who in Seattle in the Kingdome, which is long gone. And I think there were 60,000 people in the Kingdome. And I was just, the whole time I was going, yeah, there's the Who, but oh my God, look at how many people. How many times could I fit Golden's population into this building?
So quite a cultural shock then. But once you had graduated, what did travel itself mean to you? Were you adventurous? Did you want to go in and explore the world once you'd graduated?
Yeah, I did. That happened after I got married. So I got married after I'd been teaching for a couple of years already. So I finished my degrees. I taught school for a couple of years, got married, and then we worked really hard for a year. The two of us saved our money and went to New Zealand and Australia for almost a year, and then came back and worked really hard, saved our money, went to Japan and traveled through Thailand and Malaysia, and then came back and eventually, decided we'd best settle down. And we had kids not that long after that. But my husband grew up in Calgary with it's not a cosmopolitan city by any means, but much more so than Golden. And so his father was a lawyer. And so my parents had no secondary education because of the war. His father had university education and was, white collar. And so just his experience was so different than mine. And he just kind of helped me see a different aspect of the world. It wasn't like, here, get some culture, it wasn't a Pygmalion story or anything, but it was just, you meet somebody and they expand your horizons. He's a great reader, a photographer. He's always been interested in photography. And his friends were more interested in the arts than any of my friends had ever been. And so I was just kind of immersed in that for the first time. And then, he said, we should travel. I said, I'd love to travel. So off we went.
How did you meet David?
I was living in Calgary. I was teaching, and my sister worked as a recreational therapist in a seniors facility, and he was working between university years. He was working a summer job as a photographer in that facility, and my sister got us together. So she was a matchmaker.
What's your sister's name?
Rita.
Okay, well, shout out to Rita then.
I know.
Did you thank her?
Oh, yes, I have. Yes, I have not been remiss.
So once you'd done all that traveling, though, did you come back with inspiration? Did you pick up inspiration to paint? And now do you look back at, at the light? Because I know how light is important to any artist or photographer, but particularly to you, because I know you base everything on light. Were there any influences there from your travels?
Sadly, no. I was not looking at the world in terms of painting at the time. I was more a 3D interested person, so I was doing things with paper mache in my spare time and with clay, and then after Thailand with metal. So I was thinking like a sculptor or a metalsmith. And it wasn't until when I was 40 that I started looking at the world as a painter. And that was when I was, that's not true, because the kids were, it was close to 40. It was pretty close, 38, 40 years old, when I was sitting through those interminable swimming lessons and looking at painting books, and then, getting a few books on my own and trying to do the exercises in watercolor, being really influenced by people like Charles Reed and Mel Staben Who else? Joseph Zerbukvik, a beautiful Australian watercolor painter, all of whom had a very loose, broad, rugged sort of look to their work. They were not the refined, edged, close up every line kind of painters. They were the ones that deliberately broke out of the lines. And I just found that so appealing to my sensibility for whatever reason. And so then I started, I was late 30s before I picked up a brush and started doing that. And then I only looked at the world through the eyes of a watercolor painter. So I would actually not even look that closely at oil paintings because I was so busy, if we did go to a museum, I was so busy trying to find the handful of decent watercolors in there and spending, hours in front of those amazing watercolors. So, I was closed-minded about each new medium until I was actually immersed in it. And eventually I was disgruntled with working in watercolor because it was expensive to frame. And then you'd have all these things around the studio. If it didn't sell, you'd have all of these glass framed pieces that you had to store in your house. And eventually we built a studio for me. And it just, I couldn't go very big. The colors were never as rich and saturated as I wanted. And so then I tried acrylics, thinking that was a logical progression. And acrylics just died in my hands. It was awful. They looked so bad. I didn't have a feel for it. I made it look like house paint. And a friend, bless her, said, "Why don't you try oils?" And I said, no, oils are too toxic and I work in my house. And she said, "Oils are not toxic. Solvents are toxic." And so I did some research and found out, by gum, she's right. It's not the oils that are toxic. It's the things that we add to them that make them bad to breathe in. And so I tried oils and it was just like love at first sight. It took me a long time to figure out how to use them, of course, but they felt and they looked like the best watercolors to me. There was a luminosity, a translucence to them. Every layer impacted every other layer that went on top. There was just a richness. And of course, the fact that they're so forgiving, you can keep working a piece for hours or even days, and it will still be wet. And that was really great compared to the speed drying of acrylics and watercolor. And then I started looking at oil paintings when I went to museums. But, I'm just not, I guess, that imaginative that I was busy looking at everything all at once. I was looking as I needed it for what I was doing.
And what were you painting then at the beginning?
Mostly figurative. Almost exclusively figurative, and I was mining photos that I had taken of my kids playing in creeks, swinging on swings, digging in sand, those sorts of things. And just with this real happy-go-lucky sort of confident, I don't know a thing, but I'm having a great time attitude, I was painting these big figures. And my proportions were good because I had always drawn people and horses through my whole life. Even when I was, not drawing, I still maintained that ability to get proportions pretty well. To be able to judge angles and shapes and whatnot was never a great, difficult moment for me. So yeah, it was figurative. There's not a huge market for figurative in where I live. It's a real landscape sort of place. So if you go into the local galleries, 99% of it is going to be mountains and trees and that sort of thing. But hey, that's not what I was interested in. So I did my own thing.
And the drawing then, is that something that you instill in your students when you're teaching your workshops, Ingrid? The importance of drawing as a background, a foundation to whatever medium they then follow?
I don't actually, because I teach painting, and I think painting and drawing are different things. Drawing is about lines, and painting is about masses. And so I try never to start from outlines. I start from, quick little placement marks, but I never will let myself draw a whole figure and then go to paint that figure on the canvas, because I feel like I always end up with something that looks like a coloring book if I have started with a drawing. So I prefer to put the figure in masses of color, and there will be drawing errors, proportional errors. And then I slowly massage it into place as I work. So that's the joy, again, you could do it in acrylics too, any opaque medium. You can just simply keep going over that arm that is too broad at the shoulder with some of the background color, and you can chisel it down. You can just completely move or turn a part of the body as you're working. And I like a painting that looks like it's had a lot done to it. I don't like a painting that feels like it was done perfectly first time out. I'd rather see a struggle. And in my paintings, I think you can always see a struggle. And that just brings me so much pleasure, because in the struggle is where I'm having my most fun. I love the process of painting. Putting paint on is such a joy that if I get a painting finished quickly, I feel a bit cheated. It's like, well, that wasn't as much fun as I had hoped it would be.
So is it a struggle then, or is it just part of the journey?
Yeah,
when
you're right.
You do the whole creation.
You're right. I mean, that's exactly it. My method is to feel my way towards the subject. I do teach my students to make compositional studies, which are essentially no-tans, which I'm sure you're familiar with, just black and white shapes, so that you can see where are my darker colors, how does the weight of them compare to the weight of my lighter colors? Do I have big shapes and small? Do I have an obvious focal point and a leading towards that focal point? I do make them do those compositional studies just because it stops you from thinking, I am painting this person, and I must get the eye just right. And she's got this much, hair, and it's clipped up like that, and get away from the thing. I always remember Maggie Siner, the wonderful artist Maggie Siner, has a quote in an interview I read with her where she said, "Don't paint nouns." And it's so true. As soon as you're saying to yourself, I'm painting this face and now I'm doing the nose and the cheek, you paint differently than if you say, I'm painting this light shape and around it is this, dark shape that's kind of got soft edges to it, which would be the hair, but you don't say hair and you don't say face. And so I try to get my students thinking that way, because if they're thinking about light and dark, and is that warmer or cooler? Is that based on blues or purples? If they're speaking about their work in their brains like that, then they're not being really literal. And I think the painters who come to me to learn, they're trying not to be literal. So that, that's not something I say, everybody must do this. It's just the painters who come to me have come because they see something in my work that they want for their work. And so that's how I teach. I teach a shape-based approach. I try never to let myself name things as I'm working. I'm just looking at, well, there's a light piece in that mid-value piece, and it's next to this dark small shape, and I'm like that as I work. So that's very different from drawing a figure, to say, well, now I'm drawing the head, and now I'm drawing the shoulder. Instead, you're saying there's this oval shape, and below it there's sort of a horizontal shape which slightly tilts this way, which might be the tilt of shoulders, but I don't let myself go there.
And I also wanted to ask you how you've influenced your boys, Zach and Ben. Are they interested? Have they influenced you in your art, or are you influencing them?
Well, I used to ask them for critiques. They were ruthless when they were little. What what do you think of what Mommy painted while you were at school? It's like, I don't like it. That head's too big. But my youngest, Ben, is artistic, and what I see is that kids are born that way. At least, like I didn't have any models for being somebody who sat at the table and drew all day. I think I was just born with this predilection towards that form of expressing creativity. And my eldest is, so up until age 4, both kids were the same. They're 2 years apart, but at about the age of 4, my eldest stopped sitting at the little kid's table with his crayons, scribbling and trying to draw things. And he started instead taking things apart, getting interested in Lego, bringing home abandoned things that he found in alleys and taking them apart with his little screwdrivers and whatnot, and trying to build stuff with his little junior carpentry set. So he stopped drawing at that time. But my other son, Ben, never stopped. And by the time he was in school, he had accumulated so many hours. They said that 10,000 hour thing, whether it's true or not, he certainly had accumulated it by the end of elementary school, probably before. And because he'd come home from school and he would draw, and he'd do that on the weekend. He wasn't hugely outdoorsy, so he would draw. And his skill level was incredible. His hand-eye coordination, his ability to just kind of start in a place, start making these magical, firm, decisive lines. He was very, very much about lines, never about patches, and create, I'd say, can you draw a parrot? I need a parrot for this little card that I'm giving to somebody. And he would, without going to a reference, he would simply draw a parrot. He had this incredible visual memory and the certainty to his hands. He wasn't laboriously erasing. There was almost never an erasure by the time he was in junior high. And so I think, he was born with it. I don't know that it's passed on. I just think some people, I think everybody is creative. And if you're lucky, you find your outlet, the one that suits you. And for him, it was always drawing in a very linear sort of way. And for me, I did do a lot of drawing as a kid, but it was really tight and representational. And, I'd get my mom's Good Housekeeping magazine and I would draw the pretty girl from the shampoo ad. Very, very lifelike. And I'd get all these praises for, looks just like the picture. And I go, oh, isn't that great? And now tell me it looks just like the photo and I'll want to, jump off a cliff. So things have changed. But but he on his own, and I don't think he likes the kind of work that I do. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't. He's never been unkind, but it's certainly not anything that he has ever aspired to or done in his own practice.
So once you started to get commercial about this, I'm wondering what those early images were, and when you realized that you could actually profit from being an artist, and how important that is to you now to be commercial.
Well, it's validation. If somebody, I've never sold huge amounts of work because my work is not everybody's cup of tea. It's rough and loose and largely figurative or still life in a place where mountains are the norm. And yet you have to paint what you love to paint. Otherwise, you're just going to the factory and making widgets. You're just making a product. So I always have felt, I've never even thought otherwise, that I should be doing something for the sheer commercial nature of it. Like if I painted horses here, it's a real horse town. It's very Western. I'd probably do well, but I don't want to be a horse painter. I'm not immersed in that world anymore. And so it would feel really artificial. But people, I'm such a people watcher. So that's always been where my heart is. And with some people it resonates, and with some buyers it does not. But I've been lucky. I approached one gallery in town, and that was my first gallery. I was really not ready for it. I look back at the work and go, wow, thank you for taking me on. That's amazing. But that and building a website and becoming a member of a national organization called the Federation of Canadian Artists, which kind of was a way to show my work to a larger audience. It just sort of grew. Eventually, I started teaching locally in an art supply shop that also had studios where instructors could rent the space and teach. And so it just sort of snowballed. And the other galleries that I am in, I'm no longer in the one in Calgary, but the other galleries that I've gotten, actually, I was really lucky that they approached me. They saw my work through whatever exhibitions, the Federation exhibitions, or, I don't know, really, social media. And they approached me. And so it just kind of built quite nicely without me having to hit the pavement with my paintings under my arm going, please take me in, which would have been beyond me, actually, because, I'm doing something which is different from what is the norm in my geographical area. And sometimes it's easy to lose heart, to feel like you're just really not doing the right thing. But luckily, my husband, who has a very good eye and is really plugged into the arts, has always been supportive and said, no, you're doing good work. You can't do something that you don't believe in doing. Keep doing it. It's good work.
So how do you define success then as an artist? What does it mean to you?
I think when I'm the most successful, it's when I am not thinking commercially as I'm painting. When I can just get in the zone and interact with that canvas and say, what needs to happen here? And I wonder what would happen if I did this thing. And you get in the zone and it's just sheer buoyant movement and color and brush mark. It's really, it's really tactile. I love that about oil paints. They're so creamy and lovely. And then at the end, if a month later I still look at that painting and go, that's pretty decent. There's some stuff there that I would still stand behind, which, I'm pretty ruthless actually, and that's not often the case. That is success. And then I think people respond to that. I am kind of a painter's painter, so a lot of my work that sells actually goes to other painters, and that is success for me because people whose eyes know what they're looking at see something in my work and want to spend their money on it. So that is success, and I consider it a real honor that I can teach painters. And I've been teaching online for the last 3 years through the Winslow Art Center on Bainbridge Island in Washington. And I have been able to teach hundreds and hundreds of painters from around the world. So I've had Australians and somebody from Egypt most recently, and lots of Americans and Europeans. It's just been amazing.
I see that you are being drawn to the light. You are heading to Umbria in Italy.
I'm going to Umbria. Yes, I am. Yes, I did that last year with the Winslow, and I'm going again this coming year and also the following year. So that is success. I mean, I'm ambivalent about teaching some days, and I think, I just want to be able to sell a lot of work and make all of my income that way, because that would be validation for what I'm doing. But then when I'm teaching and I'm interacting with all these adults who are, unlike when I was teaching junior high kids, these adults have paid good money and they're passionate about what they're doing and they want to learn, they want to be there. And it's the energy of that, even over Zoom, the energy is incredible. And the work ethic that I see from all of those painters really resonates with me because I've got it. And I wouldn't actually not want to be teaching. Did I say that right? I would not want to give up teaching, because it's something, you know, I learned from them. I learned by having to create the lessons that are meaningful. I can really solidify my own practice and come up with new ideas for myself as I'm making exciting lessons for them. And also sometimes they will produce things that I go, holy smokes, that's amazing what you just did there. And I learn from them. I see that beautiful work and applaud it and get something for my own practice from them. So that's success.
A lot of satisfaction. Yes.
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
Hugely.
And most days you're painting, then you said you can spend about 6 hours a day painting.
Yes.
So is there a day that you don't paint? Do you free yourself at all, or does this become a discipline?
It is a discipline, but it's also a joy, you know, and it is 6 days a week. And the other day is like shopping and bathroom cleaning. But it is a discipline. But every day that I walk into the studio, I have this sense that something great could happen to me today. You know, like I might be able to crack that painting problem there, or I'm always excited. It's really a place of so much creative energy, and I turn on my music sometimes, or I listen to book tapes. And if I'm turning on music, which is something I've started doing a lot more in the last year, I guess, I'm singing and dancing and painting, and the whole thing is just such a great way to spend the day. And I think, you know, I could be in an office cubicle instead. Like, what would that look like? And here I am instead. I've got this beautiful studio all my own, and I can say, I think I'll put a big slap of red right there, and maybe I'll do this and I'll do that, and I can run to the art store and get some new colors, and it's just the best life. I can't imagine. I can't imagine not leading it.
It's a wonderful life. Ideal, it seems, for an artist.
It is.
Well, Ingrid, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for asking.
It's been fun to hear your story, and long may you see the light.
Thank you.
And the links to Ingrid's website and her social media will be in the show notes accompanying this episode, where you'll also find a link to our Instagram account. That's the AART Podcast, AART with 2 A's, where you can also leave comments, questions, or suggestions for guests to come on the show here, any female artists whose work you admire. We would love to hear from you. And also in the show notes, you'll see a list of the female artists whose work the guests admire, and also their playlist too. And if you follow us on Instagram, you may notice that the music that accompanies the post for each guest is, for the most part, taken from their playlist. As always, we would love it if you have a moment whilst you're on Apple Podcasts to leave us a rating and review, because that helps others find the show, because it boosts our rankings. Until next week, when we'll have another inspiring artist, I do hope you'll join me then. For now, thank you for listening.